Okay, so we've had a chance to talk about the hippie movement. We've also talked about the civil rights movement as far as their protests and their fighting against the Vietnam War. Another group that I want to talk about is going to be, particularly, it's going to be a group of people who were involved with the draft, and they came out against the draft. Now, once you reach a certain age of 18 years old, you were eligible for the draft, and based on your birthday, you were given a number, and on a lottery system, when your number came up, then you were to report to the draft, and you would now be a soldier in the Vietnam War. And many people were upset against this. It was no longer a voluntary army. It was one where, as a country, you were forced to go fight in the war, even if you may be against the ideals of the war, of what the war was all about. Something to keep in mind is the average age of the U.S. soldier fighting in Vietnam was only 19 years old. Very young. I mean, that's the average age. So you're going to have many people over there fighting who are 18 years old, and then a few of them that are going to be over 19 years old. To put this in perspective, during World War II, the average age of a soldier was 26 years old. So it was a very different soldier that was fighting in World War II as compared to the soldiers who were fighting in Vietnam. It was very much a young man's war. An interesting thing about this is, as these young men went off to fight, they were 18 years old. They were old enough to fight, to be trained, to blow things up and to kill. That is what war is all about. But yet back home, they were not old enough to even vote in an election, and they weren't, of course, they weren't allowed to drink either too. So it was kind of a strange disconnect that these soldiers felt that, hey, our country believes that we are old enough, we are responsible enough, we are mature enough to go serve in the military, but yet they don't trust our judgment to be able to vote or to decide if we want to drink or not. It was kind of a very strange thing. Now, avoiding the draft, if you wanted to avoid the draft, if your number came up and you were told to report, if you enrolled in college and you were actively pursuing a degree, you would not have to go fight the war. And so that helped out. That was really quite nice. If you came from a family that could afford to send you to college, it basically was a way to protect you against having to go to the jungles to fight in Vietnam. Now, what this meant, though, was less affluent, I mean poorer families, and lower educated people made up the largest amount of ground troops, the people who were actually going through the jungles of Vietnam and putting their lives at risk and fighting and asked to kill people. They were obviously the less affluent and lower educated. One thing that we also found was those who could not afford college, many Latinos and African Americans, they made up the largest amount of our ground forces in Vietnam, or I should say a disproportionate amount of our ground forces in Vietnam, those who were actually doing the work of going on patrols and going through the jungle. So there was a lot of anger against the draft, and as the war went on, people began to question it more. This is another group that came out against the war, the anti-draft group. And I included a picture here of a young man, young African-American man, and what he's doing in protest, this is during a rally, he is actually burning his draft card. And because that's a government-issued card, it's actually a felony to burn that. But in protest, he wanted to show that he was against the war, and he was going to burn his draft card. And that was actually a fairly common act of rebellion and protest, was to actually burn your cards and not report to the draft. And you could escape to Canada if you wanted to, or Mexico, or go somewhere else. Some of them chose to stay in America, but many people chose to avoid the draft.